Alrighty, folks, we will give our task force a few minutes to join. We'll get started here in just a few minutes, so hang tight and we will get this meeting underway. Thank you for tuning in.
Good evening, Patrick and Robert. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here.
Great to see everyone's face. Excited. Robert, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Christy, thank you for joining us. We have a packed evening tonight. Michael Rubin, hope you're well, my friend. We'll get started in just a few minutes here. We're just a hair away from critical mass. So once we have our critical mass here, we'll get things going. So give us about 2 to 3 more minutes. Cedric, good to see you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Chris. Chris, I believe if my timeline is lining up, happy graduation is in order.
It's tomorrow.
There we go. All right. I knew the dates were somewhere around here. I knew it was a date this week that ends in a Y. I couldn't remember which one though. And Cedric, congratulations are in order for you as well. I think, what did you say? You had 37 you had to take care of?
27, 3 more.
27.
3 more left. 1 tomorrow, 2 on Thursday. 1 Thursday morning, 1 Thursday. Last one's Thursday afternoon.
Congratulations are in order to you as well.
Thank you.
Jevon, I think we've got critical mass. Let's go ahead and get started, sir.
Let's do this. That sounds great to me. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to the June 15th installment of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force here in Takoma Park. I'm Jevon Hodge, and I'm joined here by my Link strategic partners and Experience Advisory colleagues, Michael Aiken, Cordell Carter, Jamal Holtz, Molly Mitzner. Thank you all for your time today. Madam Mayor, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to get this agenda kicked off and on the road. So as we go through the meeting today, we will walk through, have our charge, walk through our timeline, hear from our mayor and councilwoman. Then we'll dive into subject matter experts. From there, we'll have a report out from the subcommittees, and then we will close the meeting today with a general discussion around next steps, topics, themes, and tying the bow on the report as it all comes together. So Molly, I'm going to ask you to pull up the slideshow for us. We'll whip through this really quickly, just a few slides here. Thank you all for joining us. We deeply appreciate you. We're going to come back to the charge, and I'm going to kick it over to our mayor to do the charge in just a hair here. But before we do that, next slide. Before we do that, we are here to talk about the timeline. So we are at June 15th. If you look at the June 15th box, we are at our task force meeting. Next week, we will have a subcommittee meeting and then a community listening session on the 28th, and then at the last subcommittee meeting on the 29th. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to showcase some of the high-level themes that have been discussed at Molly. Can you go back just here? Oh, there we go. We're going to discuss the high-level themes that we have we've gathered in our subcommittee sessions. We're going to take that and we're going to build out the next phase of that, and we'll have review draft recommendations ready to go for us to discuss and talk about on the 22nd meeting. At the 22nd meeting, we're going to incorporate the feedback that we hear and have that prepared and ready to go for the 28th community listening session. At the community listening session on the 28th, we're going to go through and talk about our draft recommendations, gather input from the community, and then we'll incorporate that into our feedback for us to digest the following day on the 29th so that we can finalize our report, bring it all together so that it is ready to go to council for their review on July the 6th. Does anybody have any questions about the timeline? Molly, you can take down that slideshow. Does anybody have any questions about the timeline? All righty, hearing no questions, we have the public listening section on the 28th of June. We will share the graphic with you all via email, and please send that far and wide. Jamal will drop in the chat, into the chat box where you can hear public, where you can list your public comments and share that with your friends and families as well. And without further ado, it is my distinctive pleasure to bring up Madam Mayor Kate Stewart to provide remarks and give us our charge.
Great. Thank you, Jevin. Thank you again to the task force. I know it's been a couple of weeks since I came to one of your meetings, and I just want to say thank you again for all the work that you're doing. I've been able to follow along with the recordings as well as see the notes from your meetings, and I know you're doing a great deal of work. I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about, as you all are wrapping up and getting towards finishing up your recommendations and report, to kind of provide a reminder of the process that will continue on after you provide your recommendations to the City Council in July. Because I see this not as the end of the task force work, but rather the beginning of the next stage of the work we have to do together. And so once you provide the recommendations to the City Council, we will be reviewing them. We will look at those that may be easy to adopt, those that may take a little bit more time, that will need more public input. We'll need to look at changes that are happening at the state level and the county level, as well as evaluating how we can spend some of the ARPA funds. So we have this unique opportunity that we will be getting your recommendations when we also do have potentially some money available to put towards some pilot programs and other things. So that is all to say that as you're working on these final recommendations and your report, please don't think of it as the last thing that you're doing on this topic. We hope that you will be able to continue to engage with the City Council to help us move forward these recommendations and continue to be ambassadors in your community and in your neighborhood to talk to others about these initiatives. As you're looking at the recommendations, one of the things that I've been thinking about that would be most helpful to the City Council is if you're able to provide us with overarching goals of where you think we need to go, as well as specific recommendations. So I thought I'd give an example of something. I know one of the things that you all have been talking about and we've been talking about on the City Council is looking at ways that we can respond to calls for service that may not need a police officer to respond to that. You know, some people have said, can't we just set up a 311 number or a different number? And that's a specific recommendation. However, it would be most helpful to us on the city council if you first set out the goal of shifting how we respond to calls for service, and then provided that as an example. Because if we just get the example, the thing is that there are lots of things that go into how we do respond to 911 calls, how we can set up another number that people can call into. And so knowing the overarching goal is addressing how we do calls for service, and getting that one specific example is much more useful to us and will be as we continue the dialogue with you on how to meet some of the recommendations. So I just wanted to provide that as an example, because I know you all are talking about a lot of things. And so sometimes I know it's easy. We do it on council all the time to get bogged down in sometimes specifics. And if you sometimes pulling back and thinking about what the overarching goal is, and then we can continue working together on hammering out how we're going to meet that goal. I also just want to say thank you to the subject matter experts who joined us this evening. One of the things that we want to continue to remind ourselves is that we're looking at public safety overall and how we can reimagine public safety. Lots of times I think we get focused very much on the police department, but we really want to be thinking about our whole community and how we can really reimagine public safety in our community. So I'm really glad that we have representatives from different segments of our community tonight. So thank you. And I think I'll turn it back to Jevin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see that Councilwoman Searcy has arrived, and Councilwoman Searcy, we would like to invite you to share a few thoughts. You're on mute, Councilwoman.
Sorry, I was double muted. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. First, let me apologize for taking this call in my car. I had to take my dog to the vet. He's fine, but the appointment took longer than I anticipated. So I just want to, I had the opportunity to hear the mayor talk about, you know, the purpose and the charge, and just talk a little bit about the importance of the recommendations and how your recommendations could be used by council. And I just want to reiterate the importance of, one, the work that you're doing. You are doing a lot of work in a short amount of time, and we recognize that. If solving these issues were easy, they would be solved already. And so I want to first thank you all for the amount of time that you're devoting to these topics. I know that this is a difficult task, and I appreciate you all taking it on. But to echo the mayor's point, I think one of the things that's going to be critically important is you all are making recommendations within the framework in which you have knowledge or you have information about. There's going to be a number of different things that we could tackle. And so what will be helpful for you, to us, is if you were to provide the council perhaps with some guardrails. We understand that you all haven't been able to be together long enough to make overly specific recommendations, but if you're able to make recommendations that really help the council with targeting its priorities, I think that is going to be really key in terms of how we address things. So what do I mean by targeting? You may not be in a position to make a recommendation on how the city should go about recruiting and retaining mental health professionals in the city, but you are in a position to say that is a gap that we've seen, that there's a need for mental health service provisions in the city. And so making a recommendation in that regard would be really helpful, and that would empower the council to explore options for implementing that recommendation. Similarly, if there are other things such as communication or the need for additional communication that you've identified, it may not be necessary for you to go into the weeds in terms of how that communication should happen, but if you have a general recommendation around we need additional communication around specific target groups and some of the methods that you all think might be appropriate, those are recommendations that are really helpful. And then the council can dig into the weeds. Again, I just want to stress that we are taking as a council the work that you all are doing extremely seriously. I've heard multiple times from numerous colleagues about how important your recommendations will be treated and the level of attention that we will provide once we've received them. So with that, I just want to, again, thank you all for your time and thank you for really digging deep and focusing on such an important topic. And definitely, if there are any questions about the role that the council could play in implementing your recommendations, or if you have any questions about steps after we've received recommendations from you all, I'm more than happy to answer that. But again, thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilwoman, for that very, very helpful overview, especially as we're in the crunch time right now with recommendations. We know one of the things that the task force wanted to get the ball rolling on and a little bit more in depth on was connecting with subject matter experts. The grateful thing is we have a bench of subject matter experts here with us tonight, some of which couldn't make it and have shared testimonials that I'll hand over to Michael after introduction to share those testimonials. But to kick us off, I'll introduce our subject matter experts to start with Miss Christy Lopez, who is a Georgetown law professor, and from practice, she also practiced some law. Previously, she's done some work in the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, and served as deputy chief in the Civil Rights Division. She has also led many investigations into police departments across the country, and has done lots of reform work in this space around public safety, and is looking forward to sharing her testimonial and giving some words of wisdom and advice here tonight. I'll then introduce Mr. Fernando Moreno, and sorry if I butchers anyone's name. Please correct me. Mr. Moreno is a school counselor here in Montgomery County Public Schools and works closely with young people in the city and really works with a diverse community of young people and helping on youth initiatives across the county. I'll next introduce Dr. Judy Mounty. She's a clinical social worker and does a lot of private practice work. So if there's any questions or things that may arise in the social workspace and alternative methods, please think of those things as you all are preparing your questions. And then lastly, I'll introduce but Robert Weinstock, who is the Director of Public and Media Relations at Gallaudet University, the School of the Deaf in Washington, D.C. So he leads a lot of public relations and media relations at the university and communications. And then lastly, Dr. Patrick Bodera. I'm so sorry, Dr. Patrick, if I mispronounced your name, but Dr. Patrick serves as a manager at Knowledge Translation Center, also at Gallaudet University School of the Deaf. So as you all are, as a task force, are thinking through questions to ask Budao, I just got the Budrao, as I just got the correction from my team. Sorry. As you all are thinking through questions for the subject matter experts and want to connect and engage with the experts, I'll hand it over to my colleague Michael to share some testimonials that we got from Roy Austin, who was a deputy assistant attorney general in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and also Laura, who does lots of work in the business community. So, Michael, I'll toss it over to you.
Excellent. Those two SMEs were not able to join us tonight, but they did provide some written remarks, which I will share after those who did join us to make sure that we're respecting everyone's time. So Ms. Lopez, I'll start with you. If you want to go ahead and share a few thoughts, I know you have some direct work on task forces like this, and then we'll go in the order that Jamal introduced everyone, and then we'll do some Q&A. Take it away.
Sure, thank you so much. And I didn't actually prepare remarks because I wanted to give all of you the time to ask questions. I think I want to be here as a resource more than anything. I will just say a couple of things. First is it's so refreshing to see Mayor Kate Stewart here when I just co-chaired the DC Police Reform Commission on Public Safety, and we came out with a report called Decentering Policing to Improve Public Safety. And I'm happy to talk about why we chose that title. But we never had the mayor come speak to our group even once. So it's such a nice reminder to have a mayor that's so engaged on these issues and so knowledgeable about them. I want to join the mayor and others in thanking all of you for your work, because I know personally how much time it takes and how important it is. So this is really, really important work. And I just couldn't be more grateful as someone who's dedicated my career to this work and someone who has lived in Takoma Park for about 25 years. This is really important work, and thank you so much for taking the time to do it. I'll say just a couple of broad things, and then, as I said, leave it to all of you to ask any questions you might want to. One is just a reminder that there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, and that I think reflects an over-reliance on law enforcement to keep us safe generally. But the point I want to raise is that over 90% of those law enforcement agencies are agencies of less than 50 police officers. And what that means is that all of you have the opportunity to provide an example and to be a role model, to allow Takoma Park to be a role model to thousands and thousands of police agencies that are working with communities all across the country. So although, I was in the DC Police Reform, it's one of the nation's top 50 law enforcement agencies, and there's a few like that. The law enforcement agencies that are impacting people all over this country that often don't get the attention that they should are these smaller agencies, and they need guidance. There are just different challenges and different solutions for these thousands of agencies that are smaller. So that's one thing I'll keep in mind. The second thing is that one of the themes of our work at the commission, and one of the themes of my work overall, increasingly, has been really training myself to recognize how much we've normalized some really unnecessary harm and unnecessary punitive response and a law enforcement response in keeping our communities safe. We just assume that this is the way we need to respond because that's the way we've always responded. And so in everything that you're doing, and I'm sure that you are all doing this, but always keep that, when I think when the mayor's advice was really good, try to think about the goal of the particular recommendation you're making. And I think one of the touchstones that I would encourage all of you to keep in mind is to always be questioning, can we have a less punitive response? Can we have a less, what some of us might call a carceral response? Does this need to be a law enforcement response? Or is there a way that we can support communities, that we can support individuals rather than punishing them or arresting them or ticketing them? Always be thinking about that, because everything, every stop, every ticket, every search, every arrest, every incarceration can destroy a life, can destroy a family, and in the aggregate can destroy communities. So it's really important that we stop accepting that approach to keeping us safe. And when we think about that, we can really find all sorts of creative, nurturing ways that can build community. And then related to that is that's all nice and important and good, and a really key part of this is the community education and outreach. But it's also really a lot of tedious nuts and bolts. How do we make this work when it comes time to budget, when it comes time to crunching numbers, when it comes time to the logistics? And I'll just give one example, and I'm sure you've all contended with this. So I apologize if I'm reminding you of how difficult this work is. But a lot of what cities do, what cities are doing is because that's what cities can control. And what cities want to be doing is actually controlled more at the state and the local and the county level, right? You've probably all discovered that. And so I think really helping, digging into those issues and trying to help the city and really highlighting for the state and for the county and for the public that a lot of these solutions are going to require some we've built in those norms and that normalization of a law enforcement response into the infrastructure of our states and cities and counties. And we're going to have to redo some stuff and remake some stuff in a very tedious sort of nuts and bolts kind of like just roll up your sleeves and start working, figuring out how do we shift work streams? So, hey, we want more mental health response, not more police response. Well, hey, those dollars are controlled by the county, not the city. How do we do that? Hey, this housing fund comes from the state, not the city. How do we do that? All of those things I think are going to be, these are a lot of the stuff people have been wanting to change for decades. And it hasn't changed because it's just you run up against these seemingly intractable obstacles. Well, now is the time where people are listening and paying attention and saying, hey, we can no longer allow these obstacles to stand in the way of more effective, more sensible public safety. So I would challenge those. Don't accept that wall of funding stream as something that you can overcome. Like, this is a problem. We have to find a way to change it. Maybe we can't do that as a city, but we can advocate for that at the county level. We can advocate for that at the state level. So those are just sort of some big picture things I would just encourage you to think about, and certainly things I've been thinking about both in my work here in the city and my work here in DC and my work more broadly across the country. But thank you again, most of all, just thank you again for all of your work to help our community be the best that it can be for everyone who lives here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Lopez. Thank you for your comments. And we're going to head over to Mr. Morena.
Thank you. I'm going to try to give you a different perspective. I didn't have a lot of remarks, but I want to think about the culture of what public safety is from a kindergarten student who is studying in Takoma Park or any other school, and how that goes to what Christina was talking about, money. Sometimes the vision of public safety have to be beyond what we normally talk about police response, what really means to have that double relationship. A newcomer family, I'm going to talk a little bit for the newcomers families who are coming, how we establish that relationship when it's necessary, and not only have that fear of the response as a punishment from any time you call maybe a 911. In the other hand, I see, and I think, I'm sorry that Judith will do more about the relationship between our mental health, who start at the young age, our families of trauma, when they see the need of a response, and maybe the only thing that they see is a police officer coming to them because of a crisis. All of that sometimes have to be developed in money, but also in the shift of culture from and both relationships between families who come to the city. And I believe that it's not only the city boundaries, because we are around DC, around Montgomery County, around PG County, and all of that is involved the city. Although the task force is about the city of Takoma Park, but I want to be a little bit beyond that, because the communities are large. All of us are a village. Obviously, the leadership is with you guys, but from a perspective of a natural a kindergarten who is starting their schooling and their family, how they perceive public safety is very important. And I want to, maybe you already know, you already have all this movement about restorative justice, how to deal with individual mental health crisis that happen at the local level in the schools, in the middle or in Blair or high school, but also in the community. When you see somebody who is drunk in the street, or you see somebody who look very awkward in the way they behave, how we respond. I saw the mayor talking about the difference between respond with that type of situation have to come from what I tell from the beginning of our education to the kids. And I don't necessarily believe that the school is in charge of creating this civic understanding of public safety, but I strongly believe that it's all of us, and it's not defined only by that police department. And that, I think, could be a state of change of what I grew up with. Mainly, I'm looking for any question that you have specifically to the schools in terms of my personal working in high school, middle, and elementary school, but also my small dealing with a lot of counseling with substance abuse through our program when people are in DUIs and things like that, and how we are reacting to all of that. So thank you for the invitation and looking for answering any questions that you want specific.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. We appreciate you. Up next, and task force members, while we're doing our brief introductions before we start our Q&A, I want you to start thinking about and jotting down your questions so that we can be prepared and ready to go for our panel once we get through our brief introduction. So, but up next, we have Dr. Bounty. Dr. Bounty, you're up. Dr. Mounty, excuse me. So sorry about that.
So I'm Judy Mounty, thank you. I was recently brought on board and I was informed that I was coming, so I didn't really prepare any specific remarks, but related to deaf individuals in the community. I haven't worked with the police all that much. I have worked with police department.
I know that Patrick has worked with the police.
Thank you. I know that Patrick has worked with the police in the past. So I wanted to share my experiences with you. I'm also concerned that we need to have general knowledge and training.
Okay.
I'm going to voice for myself.
So the interpreter and I have not met before, and I'm not feeling comfortable with him voicing for me. So my name is Judy, and I'm deaf. I speak. Hopefully it's clear enough for you. There's a lot of misconceptions about deaf and hard of hearing people in general. And people assume that if I speak in certain situations that I must be hearing and understanding. And I think there needs to be more public awareness of the diverse needs of deaf and hard of hearing people in our community, related to public safety, related to just everyday experiences. For example, if I'm walking, I will not hear cars coming up behind me. I will not hear people coming up behind me, bikers. And the first response that people have is to get angry and start reaming you, get annoyed. And then if I respond and I use my voice and I say, I don't hear you, that just makes them become more angry. So I think we need some real basic public awareness. I hate to be saying this in 2021. I've been around for a long time. So that connects with public safety. Every deaf person has had horrendous experiences with the police. Trying to communicate, of not having lighting, of not being given other ways to communicate. And then of course, if you factor in a deaf person of color, a deaf person who is new to America, new to Takoma Park, it gets more and more complicated. But just basic everyday awareness, just not there. And sometimes I wish I had a forum to send a message and say, hey, I want to share what happened to me walking on Sligo Creek Parkway today when a biker was upset because I was in their way and I didn't hear them. So that's a big public safety issue that I think we need a way to get information out about. There is a lot of just everyday, what we call microaggression that deaf and hard of hearing people experience. And that's white presenting deaf and hard of hearing people, and it gets more complicated for deaf people of color. So, I mean, those are just some very basic remarks. But I would be very interested in having Patrick share his work with the police, because I know it was a very positive experience.
Looks like Patrick had to step away momentarily. So, and he's back. Patrick, take it away.
Sorry, my daughter. Excuse me. Anyway, so I wanted to let you know my daughter is deaf as well, and my family here is deaf, and we are so lucky to live in this city and with such wonderful people, and that's part of the reason why we moved here. It's not perfect. You know, we are able to communicate, we see situations, and some of these situations do impact us. And hopefully my experience can, you know, I can share with you, and it's not something that is just something that has occurred to me, but there are fears of the police. You know, yes, I am white, I know that, you know, and people perceive me and see me and as such, as part of that culture, but there is still a fear of the police. And I think that is something that is prevalent with most deaf Americans because of the communication issues. Sometimes, you know, we're ignored. Sometimes people assume that we're drinking, or there's other issues that are going on. So police sometimes notice behavior, you know, different behaviors, and they take notice of these different issues. And that's fine, but for a deaf individual, you know, it puts deaf individuals at risk, and it can cause misassumptions, misunderstandings. And so I think one of the things that is key is the ability to communicate. I can see, you know, a lot of the same issues why Black individuals in this country, African Americans, are afraid of the police. But we as a deaf community are afraid of the police as well. Now in this city, it's different. I think the situation here, you know, we're working together, we're trying to do things to become a better model and improve the situation for all individuals and get things moving in the right trajectory. Now, I am involved with the community policing in this area. And I've gone through the academy.
Police Academy. I'm involved with the police academy in this area. About 3 or 4 years ago, I got involved just for fun, and I had a very good experience. I'm busy now. I'm busy. You want to sit down? Okay. Hold on. Okay. My apologies. Okay. What?
What we can do is, in the interim, Mr. Wines. Oh, there we go.
Okay. She wanted to use my wife's desk and chair. She wanted to be like Daddy, sitting at the desk. Okay. Okay. All right, she's over there. All right, so yeah, I went to the police academy. I took a lot of opportunities to learn more about what's going on behind the scenes. You know, the work of the police, different parts of the force. So I learned a great deal, and I gained a respect for their work because they listened. They wanted to be accepted in the community. So today, you know, it's my wish. You know, and my goal is to have a database, some documents in the system that deaf people, deaf citizens in the community and the county as well, you know, their profiles, you know, and have them made available to the police. You know, they see that individual, what's your communication preference, you know, where do you live? It could be for an emergency purposes, house fires, thefts. For example, the police go into a house and it's a theft and they're knocking, you know, while I'm outside the house, you know, and it can be very scary, you know, I mean, you know, they could shoot me, you know, possible responding and I'm hiding from the police, but no, you know, I'm deaf. So, you know, there are many things that could go on. And I would say that you know, things that people take for granted. So oftentimes I'm hopeful for the best. And you know, working with you guys and hoping to find different ways to solve this, you know, the small possibilities that can end up becoming misunderstandings and looking for the simple solutions. I mean, there are no simple solutions. I mean, something that can benefit everyone. So those are just a few of my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Boudreau. Thank you for your thoughts, Dr. Boudreau. We appreciate you and we look forward to the panel. Last but certainly not least, before we hear the comments from the subject matter experts who cannot be with us today, Mr. Weinstock, will you bring us home?
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Can the interpreter follow me? Yes, I can see you now. I've pinned you, I can see you now. All right, just want to make sure you're following me okay. Thank you. Okay. First, thank you for inviting me to join this evening. And I need to say that as Dr. Mounty invited us yesterday, and it concerned me for two reasons. First, because, you know, we have a lot of time to prepare. And second, because, you know, we had some issues from accessibility for the panel. So we're getting involved with members of the community, and we need to be on equal footing. So, hey, I'm not blaming anyone, but, you know, it's just a concern to me. And there was some concerns brought up by Dr. Mounty and Patrick Boudreau, the same concerns as well. And for me personally, oftentimes I see the police here in town and, you know, I wave, I say hello, you know, and, you know, I you know, I'm trying to connection with you, froze up. I just, okay. You know, just trying to be cordial and let them know I appreciate the work. And there's no response. They look away, you know, they look away from me. And, you know, there's this uncomfortability. That's number one. Number two, several years ago, I believe I mentioned this to Kay, I believe I mentioned this before. Years ago, I witnessed an accident. Well, I saw it. I saw the whole thing happen from the beginning to the end. You know, someone hit a pole. So I moved over and ran over. I pulled over and ran over, and the police arrived and tried to explain to him what I saw. And he just ignored me, just blew me off. He just wasn't interested in talking with me or hearing what I witnessed. Now, I know that I told police chief at that time, I made a report and was very dismissive at the same time. And I just felt like he wasn't depending on the witnesses because it wasn't depending on me as a witness because I was deaf. I don't know, but I was really bothered by that for several years after that. So now, related to public safety itself, yeah, I want to feel that my concerns are heard. And then we have the Task 911 officer, but we can send a text to the police department and let them know of a situation. Yeah. The interpreter's having problems. I can't see your hands. They're falling below. Okay. And the community has a police department text number available to the community members to report things when we can't call. So I can't call, obviously. So I have to, write it out, and I can see a problem. I see an issue. But not once in several years have I got response to my text. None that I know of. So I don't know what the procedure is and the follow-up. I'm not aware of it. But 2 times in the last 2 years, several months later, I got a text. It blurred up.
And the
The case has been closed. And I don't remember what it was about. And the second time, there was no response at the time. But I got some months later. They closed the book maybe, but I was unaware of what had happened. So, it's a bit strange. And I feel that the response to me, well, not me personally, they don't even know who I am, but the response to the crime, somebody going through to make to say anything about it, to say something about it, some response. So I feel, if I'd be equal footing if I had, someone on the phone. So all of this is related to access or a lack of access. And it's a major concern to me because, situations of emergencies, but I'm not a spring chicken, and, who knows what may happen to me, go outside, something may happen, what may happen to any one of us, who knows? But so we need to make sure that we get service immediately. And I don't feel confident in getting response from the community, from the police department. And that's just a synopsis of my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstock, for your thoughts today. I deeply appreciate you sharing with us. We will now head into our Q&A portion of the panel. Task members, I'll facilitate a Q&A for us. Please use the raise hand function, or you can drop your questions into the chat and we'll read it aloud. Jemima, you're up first.
Hi. So I wanted to thank everybody who came on today. And I think this is specifically a question for the last couple of folks who spoke. I guess I'm interested in what or where do we find best practices or solutions to address some of these things, such as you're the witness to something and nobody's interested in talking to you, or do they have an easy access to, a sign language interpreter or whatever is needed to be able to take that information? What kind of trainings are out there that may be useful to police departments? And are there also some other kinds of alternative responses or communications that we should be thinking about in the context of the police department or even other government bodies encountering a deaf population?
Thank you, Jemima. Dr. Mounty, Mr. Weinstein, or Dr. Boudreau, and either would like to answer that. Duas, you're on mute.
This is Patrick. I'm just trying to catch up here.
The
I guess
question.
I'll go, Mr.
Oh, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, Mr. Weinstock, I'll go. Do you want me to go? Okay. I won't get an issue of the sign language interpreters. I mean, I'll put that to the side. But I think some things are not even deaf related. Some things are not. Like, for example, I sent a text and I'm expecting a response, period. Doesn't matter who I am. That's number one. Number two, if you want to, work with the police department, they want to work with me, they want to get involved with me, it's not a deaf or hearing issue if they want to work with me. So those are really the two things. Those are really basic things to me. So those are the two things.
Patrick, were you jumping in?
Again, like we were saying, for me, I know a lot about the different isms in our society. And I've learned a lot, especially over the last 2 years. I'm just gaining a lot of understanding. But one thing for sure, we still don't understand about what autism means. It's the hierarchy of hearing individuals and oppression of people on people who can't hear. So oftentimes, it's a response and people feel uncomfortable. And that applies to all the isms. Uncomfortable means that, it's not the appropriate response. And oftentimes when it's the police, their job is to be able to, read or interpret or understand the message of what's going on and for them to make those decisions. So, when they can't read or understand, the police, they're at a heightened sense of nerves of, well, what do? We can't figure it out. And then they dismiss. Don't want to get involved. I don't want to engage. I might make a mistake. There might be a misunderstanding. So it's like a catch-22. So, and that's where, the basic training is necessary. We have a perfect solution for everything? No. It's the art of negotiation with people of different backgrounds. So, and that's what I can say for now.
Are there any institutions or resources that you can direct us to? Jemana, I think that was a portion of your question as well. Are there any institutions or sources that you could direct us to so that we can start to garner the understanding that is needed to take the initial steps in the right direction?
If I can add, I would add like best practices or models that are already there that we should be looking to adopt.
Yes, we can always. I'm trying to. National organizations like ACLU, NAACP, they're quite aware. And the same, the deaf also has the National Association for the Deaf, and office and headquarters is in Silver Spring. So that we can, make referrals to, and they have resources, and they have a lot of case history that they can distribute. What else? I have a paper related with deaf experiences in court in the judicial system in Canada. There's some reports, deaf people, deaf experiences that have been recorded, and how they work. And I'd be happy to share that with you. If anyone, just request, just email it to me, and I can send you the report. Okay.
Wonderful. Dr. Mounty or Mr. Weinstock, anything to add to that?
Not right now. This is Dr. Judy Mounty here. Not right now.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. There's a question in the chat for Professor Lopez. Professor Lopez, this is from Task Force member Adam. When it comes to civilian oversight of policing, are there any jurisdictions that you believe are good models to follow, and why?
Great question. I think there's a couple of things to remember about civilian oversight. One is that it goes hand in hand with transparency. That really, if you have transparency and a lot of data available to the public, then any civilian can provide oversight, right? And that's a really important element to be mindful of. I think that another thing to keep in mind is that redundancy can be a good thing in civilian oversight, especially in larger cities. In a smaller place like Takoma Park, you may not need the same level or type of civilian oversight. I have found that the type of civilian oversight, if you had to pick one, in my view, the one that seems to be most effective is a sort of auditor type of approach, and it's sometimes called an independent auditor or a police auditor. And the reason for that is because it's usually someone who is paid, it's their full-time job, they have a staff, and so that they actually have the ability and the training to learn the stuff and to have time to do the stuff. Whereas a lot of times civilian review boards and that sort of approach, it's people they're trying to do on the fly alongside their 1 or 2 or 3 other jobs, if you count the, parent and everything else that people are trying to do. And they don't have a staff often. And so it's hard to know whether it's the model or the way we've carried out the model. And so it's possible that you could do something like that in a smaller community. I actually think that in smaller cities, there might be a room for innovation in terms of having, Takoma Park is not a full-time police auditor. So you can have someone who is with a broader city function, have that be part of their function. Or if you really think it's important to have expertise in policing and public safety, you could have someone who perhaps has a number of jurisdictions and is focused and can do that sort of auditing work in a number of different jurisdictions. And I think that hasn't been done as much to my knowledge, but that is definitely something that I think is worth thinking about. But the key is transparency, data being collected and analyzed and provided to the public so that the public can check that analysis, and in whatever form you choose, making sure that that person has the resources to do the job appropriately.
Thank you, Professor Lopez. Adam, does that answer your question? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Fernando,
Michael, I believe there was a question. Yep.
Yeah, Fernando, I'd like to ask you a question. The task force, we've done a lot of stakeholder audits to inform our work, and we've talked to a lot of different folks around the community. We've led focus groups, et cetera. And we're talking a lot tonight about the deaf community and some of the barriers to interaction around public safety. What other barriers are you seeing in your school system role around language access, around cultural competency? Is there anything around that the task force should be aware of as we put together our broad public safety recommendations?
When I was hearing Patrick and Robert remind me a little bit about some of the stories that some parents from mainly Hispanic, but also some people from Africa, like Ethiopia, were telling me during my years in the public schools. There is a love and hate relationship with police officers because they see them, some of them say them like enforcements and the first encounter then are in a border, but other times they see them as saviors because when there is a domestic violence situation, sometimes they are the first to react. So obviously, also for me, the most important thing is not a stereotype. Not every person who is Hispanic is going to have the same reaction. So when we do trainings, we emphasize that the community, like if we talk about Latino community, there is a lot of difference among themselves. And we have to have in mind that when we train anybody, we train not only with the stereotypes, with the depth of understanding of every member of the community. I think one thing that sometimes is missing is the relationship. And that relationship is not necessarily because of the language of the police officer, but the understanding and the common sense and can be with the deaf community in that sense. If we are really accustomed to understand and interact with people in the deaf community, we will understand a better relationship with them. Sometimes that is what is missing. And then we are waiting for that perfect police officers who can be trilingual, French, Amharic, Spanish, but it's not necessarily that need. It's really understanding the common self-established relationships. Mainly what I think is missing is that when people say community police, not necessarily is that the term, is what is our task in everybody being safe. And that is more than only the police officer coming to you and lecture. So that is what the part is missing, that daily interaction from everybody. Also, there is a big difference between totally newcomers who just arrived to the country and they don't know anything about the city service, they understand, and then other residents who have been here for a long time, but still they are having their own connections with their own community. So distinguish between a newcomer and a Hispanic resident who has been in the city for 15 years. Mainly is what I think. Also the difference between dealing with like high school, with a police officer who was at Blair, for example, how that is interacting versus somebody who we used to have in the elementary school, that the police come and talk about drugs, for example, and be safe and all of that. No? I think we have to go beyond that in terms of understanding that role of public safety is more than the police officer. Have to be the detectives, have to be the 911 dispatcher. Because one thing that is very interesting, what they are talking about, how to react when we call. There is also a better training, but not necessarily the technological training is important too, but also the understanding that not everybody is the same and have that level of training.
That is very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happening in the chat, City Manager Ludlow expressed that officers do have training for individuals that, for interactions with individuals that are deaf. But they're always, the city's always working to identify ways to expand and grow in that space. With regards to text messages, we're still waiting for an improved regional 911 service to accept text, photos, etc. And there will be follow-up around that item. There's a question proposed to Professor Lopez. Professor Lopez, with regards to the auditors, would an auditor have the ability to investigate instances of potential police misconduct and recommend or even impose disciplinary action?
They can, and they often do have the ability to investigate police misconduct. And not just police misconduct, but sometimes any critical incident or use of force. For example, the auditor in Washington, D.C. is conducting a review of a series of officer-involved shootings. There doesn't need to have been any allegation that there was any impropriety. You can always learn from an incident, even if it was lawful. The question of whether the auditor can impose disciplinary action is more fraught and varies by jurisdiction. Here in Maryland, there have long been restrictions on who can impose discipline for officers and how. Those were recently modified earlier this spring when the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights was repealed and replaced with a different bill. But there are still some, you still have to look to state law to see what your local auditor can do, or what you can do locally, regardless of whether it's an auditor or anyone else.
And it changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Thank you, Professor Lopez. Following up on your question, Kiminori, we're going to get to you just next. City Manager Ludlow, Mr. Weinstock asked, are deaf people involved in the trainings? Or are they, oh, you just responded, wonderful. Thank you for your response in the chat. Kiminori, you're up next.
Yeah, just to follow up on Professor Lopez's comments. So what do you think of appropriate model for cities, small cities like Takoma Park, in terms of like oversight model that works with police internal investigation, internal affairs? Like should they kind of exist in parallel? One oversees the other, or maybe to replace? What was your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I would want to do a little bit more fact gathering before I gave you any definitive answer. So I'm not trying to be evasive. I just don't. I think the facts. I think what you have matters. But I will say this, that I don't think in a place the size of Takoma Park you need someone that's being someone's full-time job. That doesn't strike me as necessary. So it seems to me you could make it the part of someone whose job who already has that job in the city. The issue there is going to be finding someone with the expertise and the temperament. You've got to be willing to make really hard calls if you're going to do that. I also will say that I really believe in keeping the police chief involved in discipline. You need to have someone who you hold accountable for doing that. At the same time, I'm very much a believer in the need for that civilian perspective, that non-police perspective, to infuse and inform the police department's understanding not only of the whether the behavior, the conduct was problematic, but also what the appropriate response is. And so I think that you can have a that input from the auditor and from community members. That way you get the expertise, the lived experience, the how this is playing out every day in communities, and then you still can keep the police chief accountable. Hold the police chief responsible for how he or she runs their department.
Thank you.
It's not an easy. There's no perfect response there. There's no perfect system that I know of. But that's the approach I've come to believe is the closest approximation.
Thank you.
Kiminori, does that answer your question?
Yes. Thanks.
Wonderful. For the good of the order, do we have any outstanding questions for our panel today? Hearing and seeing and reading none. Please join me in thanking our panelists. We deeply appreciate you providing some time with us today. We're grateful for your insight and your contributions to our communities and contributions to this task force tonight. So just thank you so very much.
Jevin, it looks like Patrick would like to jump in.
So just really quick, I'm looking at the posts in the chats and I put in a link. I just wanted to let everyone know that this is for the Canadian judicial system. There are 5 recommendations and you guys can read it. And you can look at more in depth the different scenarios and the situations. But again, I just wanted to let you know that I did put that in the chat and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
Thank you, Patrick. Fernando, call on you.
I have one last comment, and I don't know it's part of the task, but I'm really interested to know more, although you call me as an expert, in about the policies that maybe this task is in trying to focus. For example, in the schools, when they have a crisis and they, like a kid maybe is totally dysregulated, and we try to call and we don't find the parents. What is the policy? Crisis center between the police arriving, protocols about safety and things like that. I'm still doubting if our number one response from the school system is calling the police versus calling somebody from a mental health background to de-escalate. And I'm talking about a specific crisis in the school, but can be in the community, but I'm more concentrated in the schools. Is something that the task force is looking for, has explored these issues, the protocol of all of that?
Fernando, the task force has taken a holistic perspective to addressing public safety and the needs of public safety here in the city of Takoma Park. And so each of the respective subcommittees has their focus that intermittently work in issues that may or may not pertain to schools or children or school age individuals. And so the community quality of life subcommittee is working on issues that uplift the quality of life here in the community as it relates to public safety, which may relate to issues that pertain to schools. The alternatives to policing subcommittee is doing the same exact thing, along with the transparency subcommittee as well. So each of the respective subcommittees are having conversations that interweave in all different facets of the community.
Can I just add to Mr. Moreno's
Please.
comment and question? If you were done, Mr. Moreno.
Yeah.
Oh. So, it's such an important question. The kids often their first experience nowadays with police will be at school. And it shouldn't be that way. There's two elements to be, I would encourage everyone to think about. One is absolutely, as Ms. Moreno says, very, very rarely, if ever, I mean, in this community, will you ever need a police officer to respond to any kid in any school? It starts a lot with the preventative work, but the social workers, the mental health workers, the trained teachers who are trained so they have confidence to handle situations, right? It's all that stuff. Other kids, I know you all know all that. But the point I want to make is that part of what we're doing in schools is we're normalizing police being the response, right? And that's the cycle we have to break. That when you have a problem, you don't need to call an armed officer with arrest powers and handcuffs and a gun. There are other ways to resolve your problems. You're making kids buy into this idea of incarceration, of violence, of force, of the threat of force to solve their problems. And that's just harmful on so many levels. So it's really important when we think about the harms of policing in school. It's not just the risk that they're going to hurt someone, or many viral videos we've seen of them overreacting. It's just the everyday normalization of having a police response to things that should not involve police.
Thank you for your thoughts, Professor Lopez. Ms. Moreno, were you getting back in there? Do you have more to chime in?
Not necessarily. I'm trying to explore more further that at the public safety issue and how to cities like Takoma Park can be the leaders in showing all Montgomery County and all the other schools around the city how to address these critical issues. Because I think it starts from the beginning of the life of a student and the families, and then goes to a civic understanding of how public safety is viewed and how the police as part of that versus the other. So I totally understand Professor Lopez, and I'm looking for continuing that dialogue.
Thank you to both of you for your thoughts on this. I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Ludlow to respond.
Just wanted to take a moment to say that I think one of the things that I find difficult is that we always just think of one type of person to respond. It's either just the police officer, or it's either just the teacher or whatever. And I really do hope that as we think of a better community, we also talk about how these things are the folks are interconnected, the knowledge and support is interconnected. So part of it, I think, is also trying not to, I don't want to say this in a simplistic way, but not always just thinking there's just one answer to an issue, but really a community support approach, if possible, is probably a healthier approach.
Thank you, City Manager. And before I turn it over to Michael to provide thoughts from the subject matter experts that couldn't join. Oh, are you chiming in, Mr. Weinstock?
Yeah, real quick. First off, I think that I'm sorry, I'm freezing up.
We hear you loud and clear.
So one issue that people are facing, the image is freezing, Mr. Weinstock. The other interpreter, Du Bois.
I got it. I'll take it. Thank you. I don't want to be seen as an issue personally. One issue. I don't want to seem to be a one issue person. I just want to make sure that we're clear that each of us thinks in intersectionality within the community. We have many different things. We have many times we've heard that the 80 different languages spoken in our community. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard. My neighbors are from several different countries, different cultures, and each of us has, have needs. Now, my point is that we need to analyze the situation as we analyze any other situation in town, and hopefully with community involvement, the people from the group are speaking for themselves, and that is extremely important. And number two, the second thing, before we close, I'd like to take an opportunity to congratulate Judy on her retirement, and I wish her the very best in the future.
Thank you all so much. That is fantastic. Really great feedback across the board. I'm glad this was how we spent our time tonight. I think we have some very good recommendations coming out of today. We also have subcommittees who are digging into a lot of the issues that were raised, and so we will follow up if we have additional questions. There were two other subject matter experts who were requested by the task force. And for those who joined us tonight, we've had subject matter experts every week for the last few months of this. And so we're trying to make sure we get everyone in before we wrap this process. And we were asked to make sure we got another perspective that kind of represented the business community. You remember last week we had some discussions about that as well. So Laura O'Connor Barclay, the executive director of the Old Takoma Business Association, was not able to join, but provided some remarks that she asked us to share. She said that her businesses and the businesses that she talks to desire a non-police contact for assistance with non-customers who enter their businesses, or loiterers or unhoused people on the exterior of their businesses. Business owners want to provide assistance to those in need, or also may need assistance to diffuse difficult situations, but are reluctant to call the police as the only option for help. Businesses also still desire obvious police presence in the commercial district to help deter crime, either police officers on foot or patrol cars parked in the area. Longtime business owners often speak favorably of the days when police came around inside their shops, knew them by name, and they felt a connection with them. Many do not think that they see enough police in the neighborhood or in their establishments. So I wanted to pass that along, and she said she's available for any follow-up questions that anyone has. We were also asked to reach back out to Roy Austin, who was part of our initial group of stakeholder interviews we did and was captured in that report. Roy Austin is a Takoma Park resident. He also was the Deputy Attorney General in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division from 2010 to 2014, and Deputy Assistant to the President in the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice and Opportunity, among other things. So he said he was sorry he was not able to join, but he wants to continue to be a resource. He said the one thing that he would direct the task force to is the link that Jevin just put into the chat. He said he was heavily involved in the recent work of the Council on Criminal Justice's Task Force on Policing. Their report came out in May, and he wanted to make sure that this group had it to look at as they were pursuing their work. And he said if anyone reads that and has specific questions, to please let him know, and he's happy to provide as much context as is helpful. Perfect. We are, it's been a long meeting, but we still have more to do. So I'm going to ask folks to stick with us. If any of our SMEs need to go, we thank you for your time. This has been really helpful, and we will follow up. You're also welcome to stay, but no pressure to do so. So the next part of this meeting, which I'm going to lead us through, is making sure that we're starting to align on some of what these recommendations are going to look like, and specifically a process by which we're going to get from really good discussions to a final report. So we're going to start that by getting a report out from each subcommittee. We've got a slide that captures some of the topics that have been discussed. So we're going to pull a slide deck back up. We'll get a report out from each subcommittee, and then we'll have a discussion as a task force about what this week looks like leading into next week. Our full subcommittee meeting next week, all 2 hours of it, will be set aside for work at the subcommittee level to really make sure we're refining and coming to some ideas before we have our public meeting. So Jevin, if you want to pull up the slide deck, or I'm sorry, Molly, if you want to pull up the slide deck, we will do this efficiently, but we do want to make sure that we get all of the subcommittee report out, because there's been a tremendous amount of incredible work done over this last week. So just to orient everyone and for the public that is viewing, there have been a variety of topics and themes that have emerged during the meetings. These came from a variety of topics, but some of the resources that the subcommittees have been looking at, specifically again over the last few weeks, are looking at the Takoma Park structure and government documents, looking at the reports from other jurisdictions that have come out, bringing in subject matter experts, as you saw tonight, reports from stakeholder audits and interviews and focus groups, and then summaries of the work done during the task force meetings from March to the present. So we went back and kind of scrubbed all of that to try and figure out the key themes that we needed to be bringing forward. So we're going to start with Jevin's task force, the Community Quality of Life Task Force. And Jevin, is Sawa giving the update from your group?
Sawa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing great. So thus far, we had like a subcommittee, basically. So we wanted to have a focus group. We wanted to have more time to think about what we really wanted to do. So we divided in each group. We had housing and mental health together, and homelessness. And then we had our other group to define what we can really have from what we learn based off budgets. Because it's one thing to say that we need certain things, and it's another thing to, do we have money for these things that we're asking for? So what we came up with, our focus was to improve housing standards, and specifically Takoma Park. What we came up with was to have a Takoma Park tenant association. That way people are connected, and to talk about issues that are of concerns, basically. Another concern was, because we have so many garden style apartments and people who have several jobs, it's hard for them to know exactly what is going on. So we're deciding to have some sort of a civic group for people and organizations serving the community, because they best know what is going on in the community. There are a lot of nonprofits serving Takoma Park. And so it would be great to get their input as well. So it would be people focused. This is very broad, but we realize that there are a lot of folks, such as, I guess, they're homeless folks. So we want to define ways to give them like job trainings, We want to connect more with after school programs because we know a lot of kids are in low income housing. And we also want to find ways to have like a public safety task force. As we heard tonight, out of all our discussions, I don't think we've even touched on folks that are, you know, in the ASL community. We really didn't, unfortunately. And so that is why we need several people from different neighborhoods and disabilities and challenges, I should say, to come together and work together. Another thing that we thought of was, especially during COVID, it was really hard for people to know where to go for services, whether it was for rental assistance or food distribution. So we wanted to think of having like a resource guide, not only for housing, but for like especially mental health resources and things of that. Another thing we wanted to do was to create or actually just find ways to figure out how to improve beyond like improving housing standards. We wanted to know the latest reports on like inspections, because a lot of the times we don't know how. I mean, we can say we want to improve housing, but how are we going to do that? And I know, because I'm a renter, I know a lot of people have complained within my community about renting and landlords not really taking the opportunity to improve standards. And so we just wanted to follow up. So most of what we've talked about was really improving standards within the apartments and homelessness, folks that are just, you know, out and about, needing support, trying to figure out mental health services, just to connect, some sort of a community health outreach group that we could have. And so this is what we've come up with thus far, and hopefully I didn't miss anything.
So a lot of stuff on there, and I've seen some of what your group is doing, and I know it's a very comprehensive list. So anyone else from this group want to add anything to make sure the other groups are aware of kind of where your discussion is heading? Or did that capture it? We good to go? Perfect, perfect, perfect. So we're going to go to the alternative method and responses group facilitated by Cordell. Cordell, I believe Cedric is giving the update tonight. Is that correct?
He is indeed.
Perfect. Cedric, take it away, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. We've talked about quite a few things, but we narrowed it down to about 3 things. And I know one of them was definitely the part of the training. This is one of the things Judy brought up, and we talked about. Even Michael asked about it. But you know, kind of cross training and coordination with protocols and incidents that may be happening in the community, and then also the orientation of police services. And it was brought up earlier about how schools handle the disciplines of a student. I think it was Mrs. Lopez, she talked about basically that we should not have trained officers be the first mediation and intervention for children in the school system. We'll quite agree. To actually answer that, and I hope, Fernando, I can just tell them real quick that there is a behavioral task force in all schools. They have a task force in every school from elementary to high school, and they do the intervention when a child or student is out of control mentally in some regards. It doesn't have to be in the physical result. And what they do when they cannot contact the parents, they do get with the crisis center social worker and the community worker. And what they do is then try to get that child to a crisis center. So that answers that question earlier. So those are some of the things that we talked about. Also dispatch with multiple agencies and coordinating with the 911. We talked about with 911 not having to use that as the focal point, but maybe have to find something like a 211 where people would call in and they would be directed for whatever situation that has arisen in their area. And then that way, it wouldn't just be put on the police to show up to a situation where we would not need police. Because sometimes sometimes, and then it becomes a police matter when it wasn't a police matter at the beginning. And then that's when you have arrests and things of that nature, which then become unnecessary. And then we talked about, and this was one point Michael brought up, was the data and the transparency part that we need to have, and that the community doesn't always get, and it be obtainable in various language, and it be accessible to everybody in that community to show what the police and what they're doing, and how dispatch operates, how the whole system is operated, and it could be put in a user-friendly form so that people who even the first language may not be English, but even those who may not, let's say, from an educational standpoint, may be able to read well, or whatever the case may be, it would still be accessible to them, and there could be some comprehending once they would see a report as such of that matter. That's pretty much what we talked about. That's where we are. Would like to add to, I thought, and I brought this up, the last thing was that I think everything responds around our communities. So I think if we could have something just as the council does, where they have a council forum where the community can speak to the council and give their views, there would be something where the communities could speak to one another and be able to deal in a real sensitive way in the beginning with the cultural differences, the biases, and our behaviors, how we act to one another. And then as we could move on, we could then be able to get into more graphic and the more sensitive topics. But in the beginning, just bring people together and talk about some of the things that may bother them, some of the fears they may have with another minority group, or whatever the case may be. And also kind of limit it, kind of dispel some of the stereotypes that we have in all the different communities abroad. That's something that we think that we want to add to that too. So that was it.
Cedric, that is fantastic. I really like how your group has grouped these: training, dispatch, data transparency with some specifics. It's really helpful from a reporting standpoint. So thank you for that. Anyone else from this group have anything to add?
Yeah. Oh.
Good, Sadie.
Okay. I guess just a couple things that we also talked about that were more in the brainstorming phase, but I still think are important to share. Having some kind of an ongoing smaller task force.
Yes.
We weren't really sure on what kind of timeline we were looking at for that, but that would help look over the implementation of the recommendations that we give and track if the city is actually making these improvements. And we were just brainstorming how that representation would be made and what would the timeline be with that, because obviously if it was just something a year from the road or a year from now, then the city probably wouldn't have the time to make a lot of those recommendations yet, or implement those recommendations. But and then one other thing was brainstorming ways to think about like optional training for Takoma Park teachers about different things like critical race theory and anti-racism and the school to prison pipeline. And G-Day, I know, also had some ideas for that, but those were more in the brainstorming phase. But I think those were really important things that we also talked about.
That's great.
Thank you, Sadie. Thank you.
Anyone else from this group have anything to add?
Yeah, just one other thing. We had also talked about kind of trying to articulate ways to limit certain types of police actions that may not rise to the level of there being an imminent crisis, or, that kind of nexus to harm being pretty far away. So, if I haven't completed my vehicle admissions, let's say, and I'm expired, that may not necessarily be a cause to pull me over, since we know that in some of those instances, even the most well-meaning stops or what have you can end in an unfortunate way. So certainly kind of maybe creating a continuum where we're saying these things might be worthy of reconsideration and how we respond to these types of issues.
Excellent. Thank you. Anything else? Excellent report out. Thank you. And then the last committee is on community engagement and transparency. Lots of good back and forth to come up with some recommendations here. I know Lauren was planning to report out, but had to go. So I'm looking to Jumana, Adam, Kiminori. Anyone want to run through this list or give a high level of some of the things your group is looking at?
I can do it unless somebody else wants to jump in.
Go for it, Jumana.
Okay. So yeah, we focused very much on sort of both how easy is it to find, how accessible is information, how easy is it to find it, how is it communicated out, and what are the like the internal communications that are happening, and what kind of transparency is involved in some of these processes. I do just want to follow up on something that Sadie just said, because one of the things, I apologize, there's a Fortnite, I think, happening in the background. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay. So, but in the context of something Sadie just said, one of the things that we were toying with, was sort of playing with as a recommendation was a good, some sort of like a mechanism going forward, a smaller set, sort of task force set that would be able to check on implementation. So I just wanted to sort of +1 that from our committee. But in the context of what we've been looking at, it is the different forms of communications. Like I know the Chiefs Advisory Board is one form of like input, but whether or not that's representative, and how do we get representative input to the city and to the police force, and what that could look like. We've looked at specific policies in places like what happens with the new laws, and looking at how things get reported out about citizen complaints, how they're handled, what are alternative mechanisms for citizen complaints that involve actual citizens versus just internal police processes. How are the results of those things reported out, and what are the possibilities with new legislation in terms of being more transparent about how many complaints have been made, what are the sort of remedies, or what kind of actions have been taken, and sort of that basket of questions. We've looked at specific policies like the body camera policies of the police department, and have some specific recommendations on that, and the type of transparency and oversight that can go with that, including the accessibility of the actual videos that are taken by the body cameras, particularly on critical incidents. And then I think there was a lot on communication channels, right, that sort of enveloped, was it through the Chief Advisory Board, was it through the information that comes from the public information officers, how that's vetted, how that gets out to people. We are looking at different types of training. I know this is listed as sensitivity training, but I don't know that that's exactly the term I would use. But looking at what kind of trainings are being done for the police department, who's doing them, and are they getting to the heart of some of the issues that we've talked about. Like I said, around the public information officer, there's a question of we were trying to look into what are the mechanisms for which those kinds of communications that go out to the public are reviewed in a way that would not come across as offensive, I guess, just to put it directly, right? Particularly around sort of big dates or critical incidents as part of it. And I would also say, in looking at some of the things that we've been trying to focus on, and I know they're not on this list because these are things that I sent and maybe I sent them late. But specifically, part of communications is how is the chief communicating to his officers? And this goes off of what Gita was just saying, right? In terms of what are we prioritizing, what are we not prioritizing, with a specific recommendation of deprioritizing any kind of infraction that doesn't have sort of a real criminal legal system link. That's not something that is that is enforced by the criminal legal system, right? Like an expired plate, like you didn't do your emissions test, like a taillight, and sort of clear and effective communications about priorities for what officers are and are not to be focused on enforcing, as well as the communication that comes from taking out anything that doesn't have to do with any infraction of criminal law out of the police system. And so we identified a number of areas, including the victim's advocate, the crossing guards, the people who view red light cameras, although I understand there may be some stickiness in that for some reason or another. Basically, every function that is not a function that results in a criminal prosecution should not live in the police department. And that also communicates out to people sort of how these things are treated. And I think there was one last thing that is escaping me. But I think that's largely where we're at. We're trying to think about both how things are communicated out, how things are communicated internally, and what things don't belong or should not live in the police department at all.
Perfect, Jumana. Kiminori, Adam, anyone else have anything they want to add to that? That was great. Kiminori, I got a thumbs up. Adam, anything to add? I know you're in the car. Anything to add?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Joanna.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so here in our kind of closing part of the meeting, you heard the mayor and the council member talk about this at the beginning about what happens after the report. The report comes out, work continues. The report's not the end. The report is informing all of the work yet to come. So thinking through that and really thinking through the process by which we're going to get to a final report over the next couple of weeks or so, we still have plenty of time. We lead a lot of public processes. It always feels rushed at this point. We've got plenty of time to put together a really high quality report, but we do want to make sure that the work isn't continuing to happen only at the subcommittee level, but that we're getting the subcommittees to interact with each other and really figure out what are task force level recommendations, what are subcommittee recommendations, and what are individual recommendations, and thinking through a report structure that can capture all of that. From all of the notes that we've seen over the last week or so, there are some folks who say, I think this is really important, but I don't know if anyone else does. We can absolutely have room in the report for things that people think, I, as a task force member, think this is important. It might not rise to the level of a subcommittee report or a task force recommendation, but we can capture those. At the same level, we have subcommittees that have done really intense work, and we want to capture lots of that discussion. Not all of those discussions are going to lead to a really specific task force recommendation, but some of them will. And then finally, there will be a series of task force level recommendations that as we come together outside of our subcommittees and really massage these, there are going to be those things that everyone says, yes, this makes sense. And as a full task force, we want to advance this as a formal recommendation. The other thing that I want to make sure, and then Ajamel, I'm going to come right to you. The other thing I want to make sure that we're thinking through is something that we heard at the beginning of the meeting, and what Councilmember Searcy said. It's really helpful for the council to not just have the specific recommendation, but have the goal behind that. So we as a task force thought it was really important to find a solution around X, Y, and Z, and here's why. Some of the recommendations that may accomplish that are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so as our team really works with all of you to start writing the content and put it in some format that makes sense, we're going to be asking that question. So yes, we've got a recommendation. What's the goal? What's the why? What are we trying to solve for so that the council can have that context as well when they do their work going forward? I'm going to pause there, and Ajamel, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. A couple of process questions. First one is, so the convener's link will be writing the report. Is that correct?
So we have writers that will be doing as much editing or writing as is needed. Some of the subcommittees have gotten to a really robust level of writing, which is fantastic. We will jump in and supplement where helpful. And other subcommittees have said, we've got the bullets, but we need some writing around it. So we're here to be a resource.
So you won't necessarily, so if the subcommittees come up with something, Link won't play the role of sort of adjusting or changing the content of that.
No, our role will be, what's the best way to say this? We've got to make sure that the task force report captures the process by which we got to these recommendations. So a lot of we held focus groups, we held this many meetings, right? There's going to be a whole piece there. There's going to be a pretty robust appendix of all the things that have been shared with the task force, but the recommendations themselves should really be coming from task force members. And we will play the role of, listen, one subcommittee says this, another subcommittee says something different. Those are pretty contradictory. Do we want to leave in 2 contradictory recommendations with the why, or do we want to come together and try and write one overarching recommendation? That's the role we'll play.
And that specific example is one that I imagine you will involve the committee members themselves in helping to resolve.
100%.
Okay, and then that's very helpful, and it does answer a piece of what I was asking. The other piece that I was going to ask is that with regards to everything but the recommendations, in terms of the overlay of everything we've done that led us to the point that we're at, well, that portion of the report will be provided to the committee as well, and the committee will get a chance to edit that also?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing, there should be absolutely nothing that sounds or feels or looks like Link's work. That we are here to put everything together and then share it out and say, track change what you like or don't like, and we will take the responsibility of editing that back into a comprehensive document that is shared again. The other piece of that that's really important is the city has been a real collaborator on this process as well. So there should be over these next 2 or 3 weeks, we should make sure that as a report's coming together, it's also being shared with some of the city folks who've been part of this process, right? To be able to say, actually, that recommendation's predicated on data that isn't correct. Let us get you the right data. Not to water down at all or change any of the recommendations, but to make sure that all of the data that's included is correct. Does that make sense?
That's helpful. Those answer both of my questions. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the one, the timeline is always the piece that I lose sleep over. And the biggest timeline thing that we have to just all be really aware of is that public meeting on the 28th. The last thing we want to do is hold a public meeting and ask for feedback and recommendations and then provide those recommendations the night before. That destroys trust in what has been a very public process. So for that meeting on the 28th, we do need to get to some level of clarity around what are recommendations, what are ideas, and what are questions, and put those out next week. So the process kind of from today to next week is the subcommittees are doing really good and aggressive work. I've been tracking it. They're doing really great work over this last week. That will continue going into the next week. We will use next Tuesday as a subcommittee meeting where we'll break into subcommittees, but we'll write you all about this structure. But the idea that's come up from some of the subcommittees that I really like is having, 1 or 2 of the subcommittee leads rotate through the other subcommittees to make sure that the dialogue is happening at that level. So you heard an overview of what we're talking about. Let's actually put you with another subcommittee next week and spend some time nuancing and answering questions about where that's going. We really need that level of dialogue. Coming out of next Tuesday, the goal would be to have an updated series of slides and recommendations that could then be shared quite publicly no later than Thursday of next week. And that would inform our community meeting the Monday after. So just kind of keep in the back of your mind, we want to make as much progress as we can between this meeting and next Tuesday. We want to use next Tuesday to have really deep discussions about where we are, where we're agreeing, and where we're not. We want to put out some recommendations at a deeper level of specificity by late next week for feedback on that Monday. We'll then come back together as a full task force on Tuesday, process what we heard, and continue to refine these into a final report that would then be delivered a week after that. So we're still got time, but it's gonna take some time and attention. The last couple of things I would say here that I think are really, really important, and I was glad to hear, these are my words, not hers, but I was glad to hear the council member kind of provide the opening for this. It is fully my anticipation that we're going to have some things that are, we as the task force believe this is really important and we believe it has to be addressed. But given the time and the resources we had up to now, we don't have specificity around a recommendation, but we do have specificity that something needs to happen in this realm. So I think there are going to be some recommendations that are going to be there. They're going to be, council, we haven't solved this in 2.5 months of work, but it has to be solved. Here's the recommendations around it. Now, here's what we think has to happen going forward. So as you're doing your work, feel free to offer some specificity around which of these are going to need additional task forces, additional public feedback in the future to really make happen, or which of them the council you think can run with the specificity that we're providing now. Let me give you one last example that I think we've seen in a couple other processes that have been really helpful. So we've talked about having the goal first and then the recommendations. So it seems like across all of our report outs, mental health and how we provide resources around that is a priority. That level of clarity, it sounds like, can be really helpful to the council, that we need more investment here. I don't think we need to, and I don't know that we can in a lot of situations, get to a level of budget specificity of cancel these positions and fund these ones. I think we can get to a level of specificity that resources need to be provided here and here's why. And it sounds like from the council member that is what is really helpful to the council going forward, is telling them here are the priorities, here are the recommendations around it, and then they can put that through their budget process as they go forward. Anyone have questions about that? Anything about that format not feel right? Or does that capture where we think we are at this point?
This is Emil.
Yes, sir.
I mean, as far as the specificity of the recommendations, I don't know that I did hear the mayor and council members seriously, but I also think that if we're able if based on the information we have, we're able to make specific recommendations, I think we should not be constrained in any way from doing so. I think if we make the recommendation and it's not feasible, then the council presumably won't act on it. But I don't think we need to censor ourselves and not put forward specific recommendations because that quote wouldn't be as helpful, end quote. So yeah, I don't agree with that.
Yep, really helpful, and I'm glad you clarify that. So if anything that I said sounds like I'm asking anyone to censor themselves, that is not it at all. I think I'm saying, in addition to the really specific recommendations, let's make sure that we're providing the goal and the why with equal specificity. We've been involved in processes where council bodies were able to say, well, we can't do that. We can't move those 3 positions here, so we're not going to act on that recommendation, versus yes, we have to account for that. And maybe this recommendation is right, maybe it's not, but we can't write it off because we've got the why in the context. So it's almost providing as much specificity as possible around what needs to be solved and why, in addition to the recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yes, that clarification is helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. So what we're going to do coming out of tonight, we'll wrap up this meeting. I know it's been a long night. Each of the facilitators are going to be kind of your keys to making sure that everything gets done over this next week to allow for a really robust discussion next Tuesday night. There's a lot of dialogue going on at the subcommittee level. If it's helpful for you to get some of the specifics, the slides, the details from other subcommittees that were shared tonight, just ask for that through your facilitator, and we'll make sure that we're sharing that out. Continue having your dialogue. Some of you doing it through email, some of you are doing it in other ways. Continue to do that at the subcommittee level. We will be looking to the subcommittees for another level of specificity heading into Tuesday night. Our facilitators will take the responsibility of pulling that all together into a format that allows us to take a pretty deep dive next Tuesday night and decide what we're putting forward for the public meeting after that. We'll type all of this up. We'll also make sure we're sharing the video link for anyone who had to drop off early, but lots of progress made tonight. Any questions or closing thoughts? Kiminori, go ahead, sir.
You may have already said it, but when are we discussing like sort of overlapping themes or ideas, proposals across subcommittees? I thought you might be talking about that tonight. Or is it next week?
Next week, we're going to dig into that into a very real way. Tonight was about getting each of the subcommittees to report out on what they've been doing so we can see where that natural overlap occurs. We will also pull some of those themes out in writing and share them of we've seen 2 committees working on this. Let's make sure we have space for that discussion to happen. The other thing, and I'm not concerned about this actually after the report outs tonight, I was a little concerned when we were having the discussions last week that the majority of our recommendations were policing focused, and that I wanted to make sure we also had some broader public safety, that non-policing recommendations. But in the report outs tonight, it sounds like there are plenty of those. So it sounds like this will be a really robust report as we move forward. Does that sound right?
Yeah, if we could get other subcommittees that are more detailed, list of ideas and recommendations, the better, because then we don't need to dig deeper into something that's been already discussed in depth in other subcommittees.
Absolutely. And we can share out everything that was shared tonight. And then through your facilitator, we can get you more specificity. We're also working very, very hard to make sure as much of this as possible is being done in a public setting. And so that's why some of this stuff hasn't been able to be shared through a whole listserv, et cetera, but can really happen at that subcommittee level. But we'll make sure we share out everything that we can.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Perfect. Anything else? Okay, well, we're going to close it out, and we will go ahead and share everything that was shared out tonight, and we'll be in regular contact heading into next Tuesday, so everyone knows exactly what to expect, and you can come prepared for a really robust discussion. Thanks for hanging in there. It was a long meeting, but we made a lot of progress tonight. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you to our interpreters tonight. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.